Gabriel's Gospel Grace, changing lives and kingdom building one stone at a time.
Well, good morning to you and welcome to another Motivational Monday. Now, someone actually mentioned to me that last week's topic being that of offence, they were curious as to how that fitted in with a motivational program. But from my point of view, motivation is about moving forward with confidence. And to be confident, we must also be resilient. Many things come against us in life that often hold us back and inhibit us or put barriers in the way. So with motivation, we should have the means to go forward. So this is building confidence and making you resilient to a lot of the things the enemy brings against us. So offensiveness is obviously something that's quite big in the world at the moment. But then so is the next topic we're looking at, because they kind of interact with each other, especially in this day and age. And that's the subject of guilt. Guilt is something that is actually a very tough thing to deal with. And there are different ways that people express guilt. But the thing with guilt is often it just eats away inside of you. And we have some biblical answers for that, which we may touch on in this episode. But let's actually start with what is guilt. So, question, what is guilt? So the definition, find where I am on here. Let's see what the definitions say. The fact or state of having committed an offence, crime, violation or wrong, especially against moral or penal law. So I think we can all recognise that as genuinely having a state of being in the position of guilt. But then we also have the fact that culpability, so for example, she admitted her guilt, a feeling of responsibility or remorse for some offence, crime, wrong, etc., whether real or imagined. So guilt, we have the whole aspect of genuinely being guilty, and then we also have the aspect of feeling remorse, feeling guilty about something we did or didn't do. So let's look at those two types of guilt. We have what I'm defining as genuine guilt, which is definitely having committed an act. So if someone comes against you and accuses you of something, you can't necessarily use these tools in this episode to say, well, yes, but I don't choose to feel guilt. And the question is, did you do it? Well, yes, but I don't want to feel guilty about it. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. If we feel guilty, then it's probably because we are guilty, if we actually committed an offence. Alternatively, though, we have false guilt, which is normally for being made to feel guilty, so guilted. So the example says some or make someone feel guilty, especially in order to induce them to do something. The classic guilt trip. So for example, parents, especially elderly parents and even parents-in-laws, may kind of imply that, you know, you've taken a holiday this year and you've gone here and there and you have a brand new car and a nice shiny house, and I'm here all on my own and I don't have this and I don't have that. Well, yes, that can be painful, and of course we can always sympathise with people and have compassion for them. That's a good thing. It's not a good thing though when people are deliberately doing it to get a response from you. So for example, oh, I hear you're going somewhere this week, and oh, if only I could afford to go, but I can't, and it's so hard. Clearly the objective there is to make you offer, randomly of course, oh, well, why don't you come with us? You can come and join us on holiday. That's clearly manipulation, and it's also deceitful. But such is the way of the world. So that's what it is to be guilted, as opposed to actually committing something of actual guilt. Now, when looking at this, I had a little bit of a prayer moment and say, where should we go with this, Lord? And I was quite surprised for the Lord to reveal this one to me. So this is Matthew 22, 20 to 21. And he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? This is when they were looking at the coin. And Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Now, when I read that, it did speak to me as to how that was relevant to this situation and how this would actually help us as a tool to go forward. So what it's basically saying is that the coin, as is money, is a thing of the world. It belongs in the world, and it's been authorized, produced in the world. It's not of God's. God's things are typically not things, even though I say God's things. Aspects of God are more supernatural and often the untouchable, the intangible. So the things of God are worldly things. Sorry, correct that. The things of the world are worldly things, which we'll look at now. So what of the world? Money and things, as in objects, items, cars, boats, aeroplanes, the latest new phone, games consoles, toys, shoes, shopping bags, handbags, things. But people are driven by things, as you know, and especially money. The next one I'm calling humanist ethics. Now, this is kind of the more of the moral high ground. For example, at the moment in the news, we hear a lot of things about human rights, which is clearly a fictitious, made-up document. Because in the reality of life, if a person is swimming and a shark is swimming alongside them, I don't think the shark, being natural, takes the position that United Nations holds a document called human rights. At the same time, please do not assume I believe that humans should be treated like animals. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there is a document that's been produced, and now that document is being used for leverage on any kind of belief or situation. But again, keyword there, leverage. People will use things such as legal articles to their advantage. So people will do such things. Ethical forces that are not ethical from a moral biblical perspective, but purely humanistic. They're just things that man is made up, which often serves or fits a purpose at the time, politically or socially, which leads us on to social or cultural norms. Now again, culture is changing over time. Things that were acceptable 10 years ago are now no longer acceptable. We're also moving into a time where there seems to be a lot of absurdity with regards to what is natural and real versus that which isn't. The fact that some situations now are being interpreted as bad and other situations as good, which actually the Bible refers to the times when things that were bad will be referred to good and vice versa. And then the last one, of course, is personal ambition and values. All of these are things of the world. They are things that are worldly and important to us, such as reputation, image, and of course, the world's fake identity. But what's of God then? Of God, for me, the obvious thing that came out from that previous scripture is that when we think of God, we think of love. And as we're talking on the subject of guilt, it seems to me that love is the key to this. So in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, it says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonour others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. It's always protected, always trusts, always hopes, and always preserves. That is the biblical definition of love. So we've had the ways of the world and the ways of love. But what does this mean? Well, that means we can use these two ways of testing a situation presented to us. Often we are presented with situations of either finding we don't fit into a situation, or we're being confronted by other people's beliefs or other people's wants and needs. A good example would be if you have an elderly parent who may have some mental health problems or a touch of dementia. And of course, you love those people. But over time, especially if they have problems with memory, they'll often start to accuse you of things, rightly or wrongly. But of course, we have to bear in mind, if they're lacking memory, then a lot of things you may have done for them, they don't recall anymore. So from their perspective, genuinely, they do not see that you are doing things for them. But actually what you're doing is possibly from a place of love. Although I do also know people of the past who would possibly see it as a point scoring game of how much more they could love their parent, how much more they could do for their parents compared to their friends. You know, even if they put them in a home, it'd have to be the best of homes, the most expensive of places. So actually, was it really about the care out of love, or was it more about ego and status, pride again? So we have two tests: things of the world versus God, which is love. So where you actions or inactions, I should say where you're in actions or inactions, because sometimes it's by not doing something. That's often quite common. People will accuse you of having not done something. For example, something happens with regards to perhaps there's a crime and you didn't intervene. Someone gets hurt, so that's your fault. Now, of course, in reality, if it was something you could have done something about and you were capable and you chose not to, so for example, you're a black belt in martial arts and the person running by was, well, basically a 12-year-old kid, and you could have stopped them, but you didn't, but then someone actually got knifed. There might be a sense of guilt in that. But if you're elderly and not capable of stopping a 12-year-old, then to interject would actually be probably your downfall as well. So every situation has to be looked at objectively and not simply subjectively. All the facts and truth need to be revealed. So back to where we were. Were your actions or inactions, were they fueled by the things of the world? Was it about gaining status and popularity? Was it about being seen to do the right things? Was it about simply being popular? Is it about there was an award or a reward for having done something? In other words, when you think about it, is it really about the other people, or is it really about yourself? Is it about some kind of way of gaining for yourself, either materially or through opportunities or status? Because if you think about it from that perspective, then your motivation to act or enact is purely selfish. And as we say, if so, it was because of the things of the world, then you are guilty. Let's test the other situation. Were your actions or inactions fueled by things of love? Did you act from a place of love? Now, of course, interesting with inaction here, because often, especially when it comes to children or teenagers, they can demand things because everyone else has something. Do you give in? Do you give them what they want? I see a lot of parents at the moment with very young children being given phones, and not just to play with, but they have actual full internet access and they can access anything. Is that wise? Is a loving thing actually probably to deny them so that they actually possibly pick up a book and actually practice reading? I'm not judging, by the way. I'm just stating sometimes inaction is an act of love. For example, if someone is using drugs and they are craving, do you give in? Do you supply them with the drugs, or do you deny them? Do you deny giving them money for it? When you know someone's got a bad habit, that can even be diet. It could be they eat junk food all the time and they want you to keep providing for them. They're a smoker and they insist that if they don't have their cigarettes, well, they can't cope because of their nerves. Do you keep fueling that habit? Or is the loving thing to do to simply deny them? This becomes the problem, doesn't it? But if you're doing it from a place of love, then you are free of guilt. You know that you did what you could with the best that you could. Keep that in mind. Not everybody has a bank account brimming over, or they have the time available, or they have the space or resources. But if you gave what you could, you did what you did, or you didn't do what you shouldn't do, then that all came from a place of love. Now, guilt tripping is partially where this video is going. Guilt tripping is very common in this world today. As I say, when you look at offence, interesting that the simple phrase of "I am offended" simply means that you should now retreat, back down, and possibly amend your behaviour to suit theirs. In other words, their self-image or self-righteousness trumps yours. But let's look at guilt tripping. What is it? Guilt tripping is a means by which another body takes influence over your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, leading to them gaining something from you. Amazing. Guilt tripping. Sounds very much like Satan, doesn't it? And of course, we know Satan works through people, but don't misunderstand. People can be selfish. People don't blame the devil for everything. The devil in the detail, as they say. People still do what people do. The Bible says there is evil in all of us. That's what we overcome. So wrongdoing is part of human nature, as is trying to get one over a friend or to gain status. But when it comes to people manipulating to gain influence over others, it's not just mind control, it's physical control. And I should also point out, it's not just individuals. This is done as part of marketing strategies today to influence you to do things differently. For example, up until, well, even in most places it still happens, but certainly the whole thing of having the chocolate counter next to the checkout, it's not just to entice you, but it's knowing that perhaps you've got children with you and your children will go, Mummy, Daddy, I want a chocolate. And eventually you give in. That's a behaviour that was predicted, but it's still an influence. And of course, it is guilt tripping because you're not giving it to the child because you love them. I think I'll treat you to a little chocolate today, little Susie, little Johnny. No, you're giving it to them because they're guilting you. At the same time, it's creating a divide among the family. Watch this ripple effect as we move forward in these sort of things. So guilt tripping is a means by which there is manipulation. There's no doubt about it. And we shouldn't be subject to that. Now, this is usually inferred. Guilt tripping's typical method is always, nearly, about their suffering or their lack. And it is always going to be a consequence of your actions or inactions. Now, at this time in the world, we are hearing all sorts of cultural things about this culture versus that culture. People should be responsible for things of ancestors of the past without even proving if these ancestors are blood relatives or not. This constant guilting. In fact, now you have people of the state that are literally apologising for things that they've had no connection with, but they feel so guilty about their culture or their race. That's how far guilt tripping has gone. It clearly is now changing the minds of people to the point they're apologetic for things that they don't have to apologise for. But these little things happen all day to all of us, and we shouldn't fall for it. Remember, someone's suffering or lack is not necessarily your fault. And a good example of this, I may have touched on this before, that if I see a homeless person outside a shop or I see a person with a suit, the Lord leads me to who needs my help. The person who's homeless may be there having had all sorts of support and opportunities before. Often people choose to take the wrong paths, and every time they get corrected, it still leads to another place where they just simply don't like the rules, don't like authority, or it doesn't suit their day. So they step out and do something different, which has a consequence. Now, we also have this with people that we may be looking after and caring for, or even the people that are trying to guilt trip us. It is the most simplest form of manipulation. But we have to recognise that when you've advised someone, when you've tried, when you've actually possibly led them to a place to live, a home, involved other sorts of agencies to come and help someone, and they reject it and they push it away, that guilt cannot be on you if your action led to a potential solution that they rejected. You know, that's very biblical from the point of view that God's always looking out for us, always loving us, and always trying to provide to us. But we're often doing the rejection. We're the ones who are not looking and turning our back. When asked to do something, it's like, you're not the boss of me. I can do what I like. And of course, that's exactly the response we get from people if we love them and try and help them. It's, you're not my boss. You can't tell me what to do. I will do what is popular. I will do what TikTok does. I will do what will make me have status and clout among my friends. I will do what makes me feel good at the expense of everyone around me feeling bad. If I have a bad day, I'm going to shout and bang about it and make sure everybody knows about it. Because why should everyone else be happy if I'm unhappy? And in reality, if you give these people often what they want, it's a short-lived experience before they turn back to what they did before. So you have to recognise this. I'm not saying that's everyone. Of course there's people in need. We need to identify those in need and help them. But we also need to recognise that when we've offered help, given help, gave of ourselves freely, and it's being rejected, there is a line that we can't keep continuing. And at that point, we shouldn't feel guilty. We should still be there for them, but recognize if we've done what we can out of a place of love, then we did what we could. Because the next step is that you force yourself into sacrifice, and not in a positive way. You may give up your job to care for someone full time. You may sell your house to pay for somebody's medical needs. But the problem is that person may still stay bitter. And eventually it gets to the point you have nothing. They gained everything, but they still lose everything. And in the process, they lose your love. Because the person who you loved and cared for becomes so bitter towards you, they push you away to the point you end up with nothing. And as we come back to the manipulation from the start, the enemy comes but to steal, kill, and destroy, and especially relationships and friendships. So don't fall for the guilt tripping. It's a mechanism. So how do we resolve this? And it's simple. The resolution is truth. We have to be truthful. You know, the situations I'm in with people, I go to meetings and all sorts, and I will reveal the truth, and often it's not comfortable. Now, I should point out, from my point of view, I'd rather share the truth with people so that they're empowered to make decisions going forward. The one thing I can often feel guilty about is not speaking out when I could have spoken out. And typically, that would be I didn't speak out because I didn't want to offend. But it's not helping someone if there's a big consequence because I didn't speak out because of fear of offending someone. It's more important to be truthful and honest, share concerns, point out things they can't see. Often, especially with my business coaching, when I work with businesses, I'll point out things that are obvious, and typically they'll take it personal at first, but then they need to realise I am being the critical friend. I'm highlighting something that if I can see it, so can everyone else, so can other people. And again, this guilting is to recognise that sometimes when people are being honest and truthful with us, they're not trying to guilt us. We have to recognise, are they telling us from a place of love, or are they actually going to gain from this? Now, of course, that doesn't mean we start not trusting people. In fact, we come back to that in a moment. Because a place of love is about trusting. We need to know who to trust and know that when they tell us something that's uncomfortable or we don't like, it's possibly for our benefit. And typically, it's going to stop guilt later on when there is something we knew about that we ignored blindly, which is very common. In fact, even I still do it at times. You know, I run a photography club, or I set one up, and I've done things like that before with coaching. And I always say to the client and the people I work with that if I can see it, if I can see a small blemish in a corner, then so can everyone else. The fact we try to ignore it and pretend we can't see it, it doesn't work like that. And I think that's the problem in the world today. So many organisations and pressure groups are trying to convince us of a reality that's not real. We all see it, but others won't speak out. And I suppose on this channel, some of us are starting to say a few things that might make people uncomfortable. But we're not saying it because we're trying to be aggressive or trying to upset people. We're saying it because it's truthful. And the truth will actually release us from that negative feeling of feeling trapped. And then we don't have to feel so guilty. So resolving with truth. The opposites are always the same, aren't they? It's always going to be selfish versus selfless. So if you are committing a crime in the world from a worldly perspective, typically it's a selfish act. It's something that gives you a gain at the expense of others. Everything from stealing all the way through to simply just pointing out people on Facebook because it gets you extra likes and things like that. You just point out and just make a fuss because, well, you think you're gaining at the expense of others. Selfish again is the guilt tripper, the one who simply says, but I need more, I'm needy, I want more, and you have more, so therefore I should have it. And we see that politically in the world today. The haves and the have-nots. Therefore, anyone who has should simply give it to those who have not. There is no accountability to whether people have worked hard towards something. And I know this was an awkward phrase, but do people deserve it? In fact, we've seen this before, haven't we, where someone's probably won the lottery, they've won millions of pounds, and they've squandered it and blown it, and they're broke again. And you think, how many people would never have got broke after a few £1,000,000 because it's just almost impossible. But this person just has the ability to do just that. As soon as they get it, they lose it. But selflessness is where we are giving of ourselves for others, doing what's right for others. And if people come against us, accusing us that we didn't do enough, well, we have to recognise that if we were being selfless and we did it from a place of love, we did give what we could. We shouldn't get to the point that we can no longer survive. We're not here to sacrifice in every situation. The sacrifice has already been done, and that was done through Jesus. And those of us who are ministers, we sacrifice ourselves to Jesus to be his ministers here on earth. But we shouldn't sacrifice ourselves so others gain at our personal expense. That's not what this is about. 1 Corinthians 6 and 7 concluded with, "Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always preserves." Don't feel guilty this week. Recognise if you're doing good in the world, you're doing it from a place of love. Do help others, care for others, give to others. Don't feel guilty because people are coming against you because you have something they don't. You know, one of the greatest gifts we have is our spiritual gift. The gift of loving others, the gift of giving of ourselves and feeling compassion for those in need. A simple conversation at the right time, in truth, can change the whole direction of a person's life. If we see someone guilt tripping someone, or if we're victims of guilt tripping, be honest with them. Tell them, please don't talk to me like that. I am giving of myself, and because I love you, I want you to stop it. Don't feel guilty out there in the world today. Go out there and be a blessing this week. God bless. If you were blessed by this video, why not give it a like? Also subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon to be notified of future videos.